Welcome to the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, including data center operators like colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, and wholesale data center providers, as well as the dozens of different kinds of data center technology and data center facilities related providers, construction, real estate, and investors in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure, as well as the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing sector within the data center industry. And this weekly show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, is for you regardless of where you sit on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of sales, like as a business development or sales development, a BDR or SDR, or account executive like an AE or an account manager or client success, a CS or CSM or something like that. Or perhaps your company has both a direct and an indirect playbook in that you work with like channel partners and resellers and distributors and master agents, depending on your business model, in which case you'll have like channel partnerships folks. Or maybe you work in some facet of marketing like digital, demand generation, field, social media, product marketing. And speaking of product, maybe you're on the go-to-market team because you work as a product manager or innovation or something similar to that. Or perhaps you are the executive sponsor, the leader, whose job it is to go out into the marketplace and recruit the best and the brightest to give you, your team, your company, the best possible chances of success in achieving your biggest growth goals in this amazing time in the data center industry. If this is the first time that you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let us know in the comments what your company does and what you do in the data center industry. We would love to know. And if you've been with us before, if you're a frequent flyer, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us as well. If you want to make sure that you get invited to upcoming educational events and get alerted about new educational resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda? What are we going to be talking about today? First, we're going to look at how data center sales and marketing teams internalize and practice. After that, we'll turn our attention to a facilities-related part of the data center ecosystem, and in particular, how a data center sustainability consultant explains economic and environmental benefits. After that, we'll shift over back into technology and talk about how a data center infrastructure consulting firm focuses on AI, artificial intelligence, and HPC, high performance computing. Right after that, we'll take a real quick break, halftime, for our message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's show, we'll talk about how a data center services company can niche down, how to get the right data center buyers, how to get to the right data center buyers at the right time. Oh, that's so important. I know a lot of companies struggle with that. And as we head down the home stretch, as we prepare to land the plane on this week's show, we'll look at how to market and sell data center IT solutions. If you have an idea for a topic or question or challenge that you or your team or your company is currently facing that you think is exciting enough, widespread enough, and valuable enough to other folks that we should consider addressing it on an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we'll add that topic to our consideration queue for upcoming episodes. So let's jump right into this week's first question, which is, how do data center sales and marketing teams internalize and practice? How do data center sales and marketing teams internalize and practice? This seems like a really timely question to address because a pretty universal practice is resetting around this topic, usually at the top of each year. most companies in and around the data center ecosystem have standardized on something similar to like a SKO, a sales kickoff, or something similar. And by that, they usually mean that it's all about the sales folks, but the marketing folks are there to support it as well, bringing their deep expertise in organizing events and content and capturing and recording and working on event experience just for an internal kind of buyer persona. So when we talk about how sales and marketing teams internalize and practice, a lot of what makes this work is getting on the same page. And in order to get on the same page, in order to drive forward with alignment, there's a couple big picture macro trends that are worth pointing out before you head into the mindset and start investing time and resources and bringing everyone together to internalize and practice. One of the biggest mindsets is, of course, in the industry right now, we're just going through crazy, unprecedented levels of growth because of all the demand stemming from investments in and around AI. And this started really accelerating in the months and the quarters following the end of 2022 when OpenAI brought ChatGPT onto the global stage to widespread adoption. And NVIDIA went from being known as the company that made the high-end graphics cards for PCs to being known as the trillion-dollar company that creates all of the GPUs that the world can't get enough of to power AI data centers. So it's not, and as a direct result of that, with the energy and the power density that's now required in data centers, there's now not enough grid capacity, and utility grid companies are telling people literally that there's waits for years. And the grid capacity turns out to be the limiting factor of where you can decide to build a data center. So all of a sudden, alternate energy like liquid natural gas and hydrogen fuel cells, and eventually nuclear, and perhaps even a little bit of solar, maybe a little bit of wind and some other kind of hydro type of energy in very small isolated pockets of the world. All of that is really taking front and center in how the world thinks about data center industry growth. But it's not just that that's going on. A really important part of understanding how to internalize and practice and get your sales, marketing, your whole go-to-market team on the same page is just understanding how different buyer preferences are today than they were as recently as 10 years ago. Throughout most of the 2010s, when mobile adoption was really starting to take off and social media usage was really starting to take off and cloud, all the different versions of cloud was really starting to take off, we saw a period in time where most of your buyers would do a lot of research on their own before they were ready to meet with someone from your sales team. At the time, CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, that's now owned by Gartner, did some really seminal, groundbreaking research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions. And they found that about 57% of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact. So if you did everything right and you made the right investments and you had a great sales kickoff and you internalized and you practiced and you got everyone on the same page, you could count on the fact that while you were generally excluded from the first 57% of that journey, you were in there for the final 43%. So that wasn't too bad. However, the days of it being not too bad and still being in there for 44% of the research and decision-making process are largely a point of nostalgia now, very much in the rearview mirror. Over the past 10 years, we've seen a dramatic acceleration in digital transformation. In a period of 10 years, we've seen a lot of baby boomers retiring and a lot more Gen Z in decision, millennials and Gen Z in decision-making roles. And on top of that, at the beginning of the 2020s, we saw tens of millions of people getting really, really used to working from home and hybrid arrangements and all the arm wrestling that's happened the last couple of years with return to office mandates versus work from home, RTO versus WFH, and all the ramifications of what that means. And at the same time, 10 years ago, it was quite common that your buyers would do a ton of research on search engines and social media, and they'd ask their colleagues for advice on LinkedIn, and they would attend webinars and they'd listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos. And all of that is still there. And it's just dramatically accelerated to the point now where YouTube has knocked the audio podcasting platforms out of the number one place for podcasting and has knocked Netflix out of the top perch for streaming on TVs. So like there's been a lot of change, and LinkedIn now is to the point where there's over 1 billion global members. So there's been a lot of acceleration just in those core areas. But what's also happened in the last 2 or 3 years is AI has upended traditional search engine research habits, meaning that it used to be like if you were trying to learn about virtualization or liquid cooling or data center decommissioning or cybersecurity, whatever it was, you would do searches on Google or maybe Bing, and you'd one by one click the 10 blue links, and you'd visit a page and you'd read it and you'd ingest it and you go back and read more, and then you'd synthesize all that. And a half hour, an hour later, you'd become an expert. What's happened in the last couple of years? Well, generative AI came along, and we have all these nifty apps on our phones and on our desktop and our laptops, starting with ChatGPT. And then there's Copilot and Claude from Anthropic and Perplexity and Gemini from Alphabet from Google and Grok. And what's ended up happening now is what used to take a half hour, an hour to understand data center decommissioning best practices. You literally can go to ChatGPT and say, I am the CTO of a mid-market manufacturing firm in the Midwestern United States with 350 employees. What are the most important best practices that I should be thinking about when it comes to decommissioning a data center? And brilliant answer within seconds. So in terms of like people's immediate gratification, what's ended up happening is that self-serve instinct that was a little bit of a thorn in your side 10 years ago has now become the predominant behavior, because especially when we're talking about selling to highly technical, highly skeptical, highly cynical, sales allergic technology professionals and engineers and developers, they don't really want to spend a lot of time having someone read the website to them anymore, or read PowerPoint slides or Google Slides or Canva slides to them anymore. There's so many better ways for them to get access to that information. And they certainly don't want to be put through the ringer for all the selfish prospecting qualification shtick that your company puts in place. They, for the most part, they want to be in control. And part of the way that they're pushing back and being in control is they're just having tons and tons of in-depth research conversations with apps like Copilot and ChatGPT all day long, so much to the point that we now have people that have half jokingly, half seriously said that there's a friend or family member or coworker who's in a relationship, with quotes around relationship, with Copilot or ChatGPT. It's like, yeah, it's that intimate, that much of an advisor, that much of a consigliere, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, of consultants and trust. And that's what this largely comes down to, is it's the battle for who is going to educate and build trust. And when it comes to thinking of what the path forward looks like for how sales and marketing teams can internalize and practice, we're already seeing a lot of companies that are changing who they consider the ideal candidate to hire into these positions. In the last 2, 3, 4 years, we've seen a huge uptick in the amount of career IT professionals and career engineers who have never sold anything in their lives being hired into business development, sales development, account relationship, account executive, account manager type roles throughout the data center ecosystem. The reason being is, in a world where prospects and future clients don't want to spend time with salespeople anymore, they still need to learn. They still need to keep their skills sharp. They still need to keep up with how other companies are approaching achieving their big goals or objectives and key results, knocking it out of the park with their key performance indicators, addressing their thorniest challenges that are driving them nuts. And they're a lot more likely to be open to having conversations with people that they perceive to be their peers than just a pushy salesperson or a pushy traditional selfish marketing kind of playbook. And as a result, yeah, we're seeing a lot more of that. We're also seeing a lot more career salespeople, especially, but really throughout the go-to-market team, investing in upskilling to take the same kind of training and certification credentials that their prospects and clients take. And not necessarily to the level of the most advanced. They don't necessarily need to be as technical as the most technical subject matter experts at the client sites, but they, for the most part, want to be as technical as somewhere in the middle of that bell curve, like an intermediate level independent contributor who's been with that company for 3, 4, 5 years. So, and it was interesting too, as that started coming up in interviews and for the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, where sales leaders and leaders in the co-location and the digital infrastructure business were talking about how their sales professionals by necessity have become more technical. And some of them are even setting up data centers to practice in their home offices. So nights and weekends, that's how they're getting their skill sharp, and they're using their commuting time, and they're using their time sitting in airports on planes to listen to on-demand training and podcasts that help them keep their skill sharp and certifying so they have those credentials. What it largely comes down to is sales and marketing professionals repositioning, reinventing themselves to shed the traditional vendor-centric titles, to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box. And in order to do that, they need to look a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders. So a lot of internalizing and practicing is thinking about how that comes into play in practice. Now, when you think about the different levels of experience, the different levels of technical skills and backgrounds that your core buyer personas have, when you look at the customer insight research, if you're the chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer, VP of sales and marketing, what it really pays to do is to inventory on your team who knows what and how strong they are in those areas. And what you'll inevitably find is there'll likely be some people that have been with your company or been in the industry a long time. And with a little bit of organizing help from someone in a content role or events role or instructional design role, you can sit down and interview that person and flesh out what a half-hour, 45-minute talk would look like on best practices that align with something that comes up really, really high in buyer persona research. And that 30 to 45-minute talk would be fantastic for your own events program, for hosting your own breakfast seminars, for hosting lunch and learns, similar kinds of after hours events. And if your prospects and clients aren't located close by enough where they can come to your facility and enjoy these in person, maybe you do a roadshow, or maybe you do webinars, or you do all of the above. And when you're fortunate enough to be able to earn editorial speaking visibility at other people's events that line up very well with your ideal client profile and core buyer personas, sure, you can take that same content and again, take it on the road to different audiences. But what I would focus on is build that content to be right in the bullseye of the biggest goals and challenges of your most important buyer personas, as opposed to starting with a lens of, hey, I need this to get past the committee for an important conference that I think I need to be at. But wait, when we do the diligence on the conference's demographics, the demographics don't line up that well with our core ICP, with our core ideal client profile and buyer personas. So think about putting your most important buyer personas, the biggest economic stakeholders on these decision committees, at the center of the universe. And in terms of educating and building trust with those folks, earning your way in early and often, lining up your deepest subject matter experts as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and thought leaders. And again, when it comes to, if you look at your most important buyer personas and you look at their skills and backgrounds, and you look at how that lines up across your internal team members, there will likely be some people that are at a very senior level. There'll be some people that are at an intermediate level, and there'll be some people that just joined the data center industry 6 months ago. And there's even a role for people that are brand new to the data center industry. You still need concierges to steer your prospects and clients in the direction of these great resources that you're producing. You still need tour guides. You still need hosts. You still need moderators, and even your entry level people that are on your team that are relatively new to this industry can for sure play a role. Now, what happens when you do the research on your most important buyer personas and you discover that, let's say for argument's sake, there's a dozen topics that are super important for your primary and another dozen topics that are super important for your secondary buyer persona? What happens when you can only cover some or most of those topics with your internal subject matter experts? Not a big deal. You look to external subject matter experts. Most companies in the data center ecosystem have consultants and contractors that they work with. Most have vendors that they work with that can supply subject matter experts. as guest speakers. And you likely also have some clients and channel partners that love getting in front of a microphone to speak about what they're most passionate about. How do you identify your customers, your clients, your channel partners that love getting in front of a microphone? Because you see they're always raising their hand to get in front of a microphone. They serve on other people's panels, they speak at conferences, they're always on podcasts, they're always on webinars. So why not ask them as well? Now, there's a couple of key mindsets when you internalize this and you practice all of this to be thinking about. Is it's education and trust building. They're not coming to listen to an infomercial. In other words, if they're there for a 90-minute event, 80 to 90% of that 90 minutes should be focusing on providing an amazing, immersive educational event experience where it's so incredibly valuable that you're certain that when you invite them back to next month's event and next month's event, they're going to be even more into bringing coworkers from their same company when they get back the confirmation email that says, hey, who else should attend? We know that when it comes to cybersecurity for mid-market manufacturing companies and your geographic area, it does truly take a team. It's not just about people on the CISO on cybersecurity, the operations, engineering, support, compliance, finance. So with that in mind, who else from your team, other stakeholders from your organization would benefit from attending? Simply hit the forward button on your email, add a thought or two on why this matters. And we know that teams that learn together grow together. So each time you continue to invest in a program like this, you're getting to meet, you're getting to educate and build trust with a bigger and bigger footprint in these target accounts on the decision committee. And when you do this well, they'll start to bring their boss and maybe even their boss's boss, or at least at the minimum, you're spreading your footprint in these target accounts. And you're getting to shape the beliefs, the methodologies of how they evaluate the different options that are in your category. This not only guarantees that you stay on the short list, it starts to proactively knock competitive options out of contention because they're spending so much time learning from your subject matter experts and participating. And I say participating, not just attending, but participating in your amazing professional development, learning and development program built for each one of your core buyer personas, that there's no reason for them to look elsewhere for this kind of information. And you're proactively driving alignment among multiple stakeholders. One of the things that we've talked about for years is when it comes to your lead generation offers, we always tell you to have a free form write-in value on, like, if you were hosting a cybersecurity event, what's your biggest cybersecurity challenge? If you were hosting an event on decommissioning, what are you struggling with most when it comes to data center decommissioning? And what's super interesting about that is as your sales team does outreach with that individual, you have in their own words, and when you do email and leave voicemails and have these conversations, you have in their own words what exactly their biggest point of pain is, what they're struggling with the most. But what's super interesting is as your account-based marketing, account-based selling, account-based experience really kicks into high gear, and you start having people register for your event or download your ebook or whatever else you're doing for lead generation, as you start to aggregate 5, 10, 15 different votes from the same team, from the same company, you can start to look across those individuals and figure out, are they all on the same page? Or are they saying 15 different things from 15 different people? That alone is worth its weight in gold to figure out whether you have a team that's aligned right now, or there's a lot more work to do to get them aligned and on the same page. And a lot of the future of being an enterprise account executive in a self-driven buyer's journey is supporting your internal champion to help your internal champion drive alignment across their team and other key stakeholders within the company. So you're in so much better shape if you're able to proactively get everyone on the same page in the formative stages of the buyer's journey. What do I mean by the formative stages of the buyer's journey? Well, if we think about early, middle, and late, awareness, consideration, and decision, most of the time, by default, if you don't have a program like this, competitors, direct competitors, indirect competitors, non-business model competitors are the ones that are infiltrating these events, are infiltrating your target accounts, the prospects and clients that you really want to have on your client list. And they're the ones that are educating and building trust and shaping the criteria, which means that if you don't meet a prospect, if you don't meet a future client until they're almost ready to buy, they're already at that 83% point, they're only maybe 17% of thought process left to influence the criteria. It's for the most part too late because someone has already stacked the decks in their favor and already driven positive alignment. So your goal should B, if you're serious about thriving in this kind of environment where you're selling to highly technical, highly cynical, sales allergic prospects and clients, to get in early and often. Early and often. Why is often so important? Because we know there's long sales cycles. We know there's a lot of stakeholders that are involved. 25 to 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decisions. So no matter how epic that investment in sponsoring a golf tournament was, that was just one of 25, 28, 30 different touch points. What are you going to do for the rest of the months, for the rest of the years where they're in that journey? And not to pick on golf tournaments, but are we really educating and building trust at that golf tournament? We're having fun. We're bonding. We're deepening friendships. Does that automatically lead to transformation when you're not educating and building trust? I sure hope you're not the dork who's pulling out the laptop on the ninth hole and breaking out your curriculum to try to drive home your bullet points, because that's not the experience they signed up for. They didn't drop by your cabana party poolside in Vegas to have martinis with you and to have your methodologies drilled into the way of thinking. It's just, don't bait and switch people. If you tell them that they're coming for a social experience, if you invite them to a baseball or football game or soccer game, don't screw with them. They're coming to be entertained and wined and dined. If you bait and switch, it's the opposite of trust. I want you to be, what tends to work a lot better for most people is to just be straightforward. Give them the headline of, hey, we've done our homework. We've looked at dozens. We've looked at hundreds of people in similar job functions in similar companies. And we know that these are the 5 or 6 biggest professional goals that everyone's working on this year. We know these are the 5 or 6 biggest struggles that that you're dealing with this year that are causing you to lose sleep, messing with your work-life balance, sanity, gaslighting. So with all of that in mind, these are the 10 or 12 topics that we're going to tackle systematically once a month for the next 10 or 12 months. And we're going to share some best practices about what we see working for other companies. That builds trust, that educates, that shapes beliefs, that drives alignment. So when we come down to how that sales and marketing team can internalize and practice, this is what we believe that most marketing and sales teams are struggling with. And what they need to be internalizing and practicing is reinventing themselves to essentially be in the professional development, learning and development business for that first 83% of the journey. That means, by definition, account executives who've traditionally lived in the later stages of the journey and punted everything over to SDRs, BDRs, and marketing. No, those account executives, those account managers need to come back way, way earlier in the journey so that they're seen by their prospects and clients as subject matter experts and teachers and consultants and trusted advisors. Along the same lines, especially for companies that are based on recurring revenue, where that initial sale is really just another starting line, marketing needs to be able to go way, way deeper. Your account managers, your client success, your channel partnerships all need great content and all need great events experiences. More important than ever in a self-driven buyer's journey where content and events are taking the place of what used to happen one-on-one in casual conversations. But now when you're essentially locked out of those conversations because they like hanging out with ChatGPT more than they like hanging out with your account executive, it's so incredibly important for us to reframe that account executive, reposition, rebrand that account executive and account manager to be seen as the experts, or at least the producer, the concierge, the moderator, the host that brings together all these amazing learning and development resources, professional development resources for their most important core buyer personas. So at a high level, that's what I'd be thinking about for how data center sales and marketing teams need to be internalizing and need to practice to be in alignment with today's buyer preferences. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, help us spread the word. Make sure to let your peers know by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching. And if you have an opportunity to rate and review that and you're getting great value, we'd love to see that from you as well. Okay, what is up next? What's our next question for this week? So now we're going to move into the facilities part of the data center ecosystem, in particular sustainability, how a data center sustainability consultant explains economic and environmental benefits, how a data center sustainability consultant professional services firm, explains economic and environmental benefits? That is a fantastic question. And before we can dive into how we're going to explain these two different categories of benefits, it's super important to review the basics, the foundational issues, so we make sure that we get our go-to-market playbook prepared to address this the right way. So let's get clarity on your ideal client profile. And when it comes to your ideal client profile, I'm especially interested in geography, company size, and industry. Geography is especially relevant when it comes to sustainability, because I speak with data center facilities professionals and data center developers and data center investors literally all over the world. Between consulting clients and the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, we host conversations on 6 of the 7 continents. We actually have not gotten to Antarctica yet, but it would be exciting to have the opportunity to talk about some of the data center related issues in Antarctica. But in the other 6 continents, yeah, pretty broad sample size across companies, small, medium, and large, across all sectors of the data center ecosystem. I can tell you without a doubt that sustainability is a much, much higher priority in Europe and in most of Asia than it is in the Americas, especially in the US right now. And it's possible that changes again in another 3 years with the shift in different presidential administrations. But for sure, the European Union's directives that are in place right now that companies need to conform to are much more front burner with sustainability than in other regions of the world. So let's first, when we talking about building a sustainability consultancy, get clarity on where you're located, where your team members are located, and where you provide consulting services. Are you just providing consulting services in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, North America, the United States? Get really, really clear on where you're providing these services, because it can make a world of difference with what kinds of regulations and directives you need to keep up with and what the prevailing sentiment is across different kinds of stakeholders and different kinds of companies. Second, when it comes to being a data center sustainability consultant and talking about economic and environmental benefits, let's get clear on what company sizes are a great fit for you. Basically, you should know your minimum engagement size for your typical consulting engagement, your workshops, your dashboard, whatever you're setting up as a transformation program around sustainability. So with that in mind, how big does a company need to be able to afford your minimum program? Maybe it's the data center operator or enterprise with its own data center needs to be at least 200 employees or 500 employees. Maybe if they're a co-location company, maybe it's significantly smaller. That's another big difference as well. When we talk about industries, it's not just like figuring out where have you done better and where you've struggled. And maybe you've done well in manufacturing and healthcare, but you've had struggles maybe in financial services and government or something like that. So yeah, that's important, but it's also equally important to think about differences in the reception you've received and difference in the results you've been able to achieve, depending on whether you're talking about data center operators, like hyperscale providers or co-location providers or edge data center providers, as opposed to companies that own their own data centers. Now, be very unusual to find really small companies that own their own enterprise data centers. Usually when a company decides to construct their own data centers, by definition, they're not a small, they're usually not even a mid-market business. They're usually an enterprise business. They could be a large mid-market where IT is really strategic, but it's definitely startup, SMB, small medium businesses with sub 200 employees, sub 500 employees. It'd be extremely unusual to find them owning and operating, constructing their own data centers. They're the classic use case for why companies go to co-location providers or go to public cloud or private cloud or hybrid or some mix of outsourcing that digital infrastructure to a company where you can have access to shared resources, shared infrastructure. So it's super helpful when it comes to defining your ideal client profile, how you've achieved product market fit and go-to-market fit, to get a lot of clarity on where you're doing business, how big or small these companies are. We talked about small, we talked about industries. We didn't talk about big. Big's another issue as well. And typically, you're in an interesting category. It is possible for a really small sustainability consulting firm with just a few employees, with a principal and a few support employees or a few partners, to have such specialized skills and such demand that you are able to have direct client relationships potentially with Fortune 500 companies. However, the big however is the less specialized you are and the more substitutability there is, the more likely it is that the enterprise client prefers to hire an enterprise or significantly larger consulting firm. And that leaves the smaller solo consultants and sustainability consulting firms with a handful or a couple of handfuls of clients to primarily focus on mid-market and some of the smaller enterprise kinds of clients. So yeah, that's the upper end of the range. And again, the best way to figure out and document that ideal client profile is where you've been most successful. For a lot of companies, this shows up in the logos on your website or your testimonials or reviews. And for sure, you can go through your CRM, your customer relationship management system. You can talk to your executives, you can talk to your finance executives, and who's generating the most revenue, who's the most profitable. Talk to your client success folks or look at your surveys, and who has the highest net promoter score, who loves what you're doing so much that they bring all of their friends and they're always raising their hand held high when you're looking for people to interview on a panel or on your podcast or in a case study. So yeah, put all that together and make sure your ideal client profile is in good shape. When it comes to these companies, what's interesting too is the original question was, how do we explain the economic and environmental benefits? Typically, economic benefit in most companies that either own their own data centers or operate outsourced data centers, the person that's going to care the most about economics of data center sustainability could either be a hybrid diagonal reporting kind of person, like ESG, environmental social governance, or it could be just someone in finance, like a CFO or a VP of finance or similar kinds of role, or sometimes chief investment officers get involved in those kinds of conversations. In terms of environmental benefits, that's someone that's focused on sustainability. And a lot of companies where sustainability is a huge goal, they actually have a chief sustainability officer. I've noticed small sample size, but interesting trend in areas of Europe where the directives are a big deal and where sustainability is a really big deal. I see in a lot of smaller companies, like sub 200, definitely sub 50 employees, where marketing leadership and sustainability leadership is rolled into one, meaning there's one C-level executive who is a chief marketing officer / chief sustainability officer, because so much of your internal and external communications and branding is joined at the hip with how you approach sustainability and your mission, vision, and values. So when it comes to like the key stakeholders to explain economic and environmental benefits, get really, really clear on your 2 or 3 most important stakeholders in these target accounts. In really small companies, you're probably dealing directly with a CEO or owner or principal or managing partner or something like that. You know, if the company has a few dozen or 100 or 200 employees. And larger companies, you almost always have that delegated down to someone in like a chief financial officer, a chief sustainability officer. And then different companies have just different ways of managing their org chart and divvying up these responsibilities. But when it comes to explaining the benefits, the economic, the financial benefits, and the environmental benefits, the sustainability benefits, this is basic go-to-market strategy, getting clarity at the company level, at the account level, building out that target account list of who you'd like the dream couple dozen, the dream couple hundred, maybe even it's a few thousand clients, potential clients, if you operate locally. And then within those accounts, who are the key stakeholders to build relationships with, and ranking and prioritizing them based on the economic impact that they have on the relationship, the working relationship that you have with that company. And again, size, your company size and their company size will often be a big driver as to how many different personas you need to support, how granular your segmentation needs to be. If you're selling to true enterprises with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees, you will likely need a much more granular segmentation strategy and a lot more personalization of content and events than you would if you were selling to small and medium-sized companies with a few hundred employees, or maybe as many as up to 1,000 employees, where where job responsibilities tend to be condensed a lot more, and there's fewer stakeholders that are involved. But once you have figured out who the 2 or 3 most important people are, then it's largely about doing buyer persona research. And we live in a world certainly where the generative AI tools can help with that, but a lot of it's super important to get their biggest goals and their biggest challenges in their own words. The most direct way to do this is to simply ask them. Face-to-face conversations, phone calls, Zoom interviews, surveys, studying their LinkedIn profiles, studying the notes in the CRM about conversations that you had with them. We need a lot of clarity on what their handful of biggest goals and handful of biggest challenges are in their own word in that particular segment. And in that particular segment is super important because the economic stakeholder, the economic benefits are very different goals and challenges than the environmental stakeholder and their goals and challenges and benefits. So once you have clarity on that, it's a lot easier to make sure that all of your messaging, all of your content, all of your educational events really resonates around what's front burner for them. And when I talk with people across the data center ecosystem, including in these professional services firms like a sustainability consultant, and they worry that their content on their website isn't resonating and their email program isn't working and their webinar programs are off the mark, a lot of the root cause is making assumptions and skipping the research. When we do the research, when we do the homework, there's really no guesswork. We know exactly what the headline needs to be on the Who We Help page on your website that's built specifically for economic stakeholders. And we know exactly what the headline and what the copywriting should look like when it comes to the dedicated website page on your website under Who We Help for environmental, sustainability-minded leaders at these particular companies. So that helps us with the landing page, website copywriting. It helps us put together the lead generation offers. It helps to know what to do with email marketing, social media, with ads, with events, with all of the above. So when it comes to explaining economic and environmental benefits, I'm very, very bullish on client centricity, really understanding what's going on in their world and how you can enter and become a valued resource to help them achieve the biggest goals that they're working on right now, individually, as a team, and as a company, and what they're struggling with most. And to the extent that you can be a solution with that through your content, through your videos, through your social posts, through your email, all of the above, you'll be perceived in a very, very different light than just every other vendor. You'll get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box. And that, I think, is the single most important part of this, when it comes to explaining economic and environmental benefits, is realizing that the single most important challenge for a lot of companies is educating and building trust. And in a world where the self-driven buyer's journey is the predominant journey now, where they're just doing so much research before they ever get to a conversation with you, it is so incredibly important to have amazingly helpful educational content and educational events that takes the place of what used to happen in one-on-one conversations as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. Case study interviews with representative clients, with representative subject matter experts from throughout not only your company, but your channel partners, your consultants, your vendors, your contractors, can also have a really, really game-changing impact in helping to not only provide social proof, but just provide another perspective that helps to reinforce your core messaging around economic benefits and environmental benefits. So that's the basic playbook that I'd be thinking about for how a data center sustainability consulting firm, a professional services firm that's principally in the business of sustainability consulting for data centers, can focus on explaining economic and sustainability, economic and environmental benefits. Okay, what is up next? What's our next question for this week? By the way, if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching. So our next question up brings us to the technology sector within the data center ecosystem, within the data center industry. So again, there's data center operators, there's data center technology firms, data center facilities related firms. We place construction, real estate, and investment in the same segment because they're so joined at the hip related. And then there's outsourced sales and marketing companies. So within data center technology, how does a data center infrastructure consulting firm focus on AI and high performance computing? How does a consulting firm that specializes in data center infrastructure focus on AI and high performance computing? So out of the gate, I just want to clarify something with terminology, with nomenclature, with jargon, is that infrastructure is used in two very different ways in and around the data center ecosystem. For data center technologists and for data center operators, when it comes to infrastructure, they're usually thinking about things like artificial intelligence, high performance computing, servers, racks, storage, switches, firewalls, physical concrete assets within the data center, software, a little less tangible, but still considered part of the core infrastructure that makes data centers work well. Meet me rooms, fiber, all of that stuff. That's a very technology-centric, data center operator-centric way of looking at infrastructure. However, when you talk to data center general contractors, data center construction firms, data center builders, site planners, architects, data center real estate experts, data center investors, and they talk about infrastructure, they're usually talking about utility grid power. They're usually talking about water. They're typically talking about land use. They're talking about all of the infrastructure that happens at the point when a data center is being developed and invested in and actually built. So it's super, super important when someone starts talking with you about data center infrastructure to clarify if they're talking about infrastructure that's inside of the data center that usually is IT centric, and if they're talking about data center that's infrastructure at the facility level, that's usually infrastructure that has to do with utilities, with power, with water, with sewers, with potentially community activist issues, elected officials, regulators, all of the above, and potentially even conversations around alternate energy like liquid natural gas and hydrogen fuel cells and small modular reactors, maybe even some solar, wind, or hydro, depending on where you're located in the world. So in this particular case, you're a data center infrastructure firm focusing on AI and high performance computing, so that with a very strong degree of certainty tells us that you're focusing on technology. So typically, to make your primary area of specialization around artificial intelligence and high performance computing, there's a couple of things that are going to happen. One is, if you look at the clients where you've been most successful, where you've achieved product market fit, where you've achieved go-to-market fit, you will inevitably find that most of the companies that want your help with building out, optimizing, and maintaining artificial intelligence and high performance computing will tend to be mid-size and enterprise kinds of clients. Mostly because for companies that have needs around tapping into artificial intelligence and high performance computing that tend to be smaller, the way they're going to typically get access to infrastructure is they'll go to a co-location operator, they'll go to AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Google Cloud, or Microsoft Azure, or a company that's providing private cloud or hybrid cloud or something like that. The smaller the company it is, the less likely it is that they would be building and optimizing their own infrastructure, and more likely it is that they're renting out a piece of someone else's infrastructure in a outsourcing fashion. So when you look at how to define your ideal client profile in terms of size, there will likely be a minimum size that you'll want to enforce with your prospecting and lead qualification rules that aligns with what your minimum entry point is for a consulting engagement. Like, for example, if the minimum infrastructure consulting engagement that you'll do in your particular addressable market, let's say for argument's sake, is $50,000 US or your local currency equivalent, you're likely not going to sell that $50,000 consulting engagement on infrastructure to a pre-revenue startup or a company that's just a few dozen employees. Usually for a company to be big enough to afford that, they're probably either a large small business or at least mid-market. They're at least a few hundred employees or venture-backed or private equity-backed or something like that to have the resources to afford that. Along the same lines, as you're thinking about where you've been most successful, as you've looked at what clients' top line, bottom line impact on your company, biggest value drivers, highest net promoter scores, all of the above, is there an upper limit where you can be impactful? What does that mean? That when it comes to infrastructure consulting, a lot of times the reason why a company would engage an infrastructure consulting firm is because they simply don't have strong enough expertise internally to be able to run that project without outside help. Usually because the IT organization isn't large enough that they have a dedicated infrastructure team or VP levels or C levels of really, really senior talent that specializes in digital infrastructure. So what that means is especially for a smaller, if you're from a smaller firm, if you're a solo consultant or from a firm with a few employees or even a few dozen employees, there will likely be a very practical limit on the biggest client that you can effectively work with before it becomes way less likely that they're a fit from a marketing, sales, and services delivery capability, just simply because what you do tends to be most valuable to a small to mid-sized company, and an enterprise company would tend to bring that expertise in-house. Now, that said, it's possible that you have extremely specialized expertise in infrastructure consulting, let's say, for example, in a particular area of healthcare in a particular country or something like that, where it's so extraordinarily valuable that there really is very little substitutability. They can't go to a larger consulting firm to get this, in which case, you literally could be selling to a venture-backed startup, like a Series B or Series C startup at some point. And the following day, you're taking a meeting with the CTO of a Fortune 500 company. It can happen. It's just a lot less likely to happen. Typically, smaller consulting firms are usually selling to small to medium-sized companies, and huge enterprise like global conglomerates are usually either hiring these type of skill sets internally and or looking to very, very large, well-known, what they perceive to be safer brands that are just significantly larger. That doesn't mean they have better or stronger expertise than you have as a smaller, highly specialized firm, but there's the perceived safety of nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So how a data center infrastructure consulting firm focuses on AI and high performance computing is getting really, really clear about that ideal client profile and their addressable market, and going all in on that focus so that you're able to completely dominate the surface area in that particular ideal client, in those buyer personas throughout the full journey. So you're able to be seen as a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, maybe even a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything that's directly related to AI at HPC for a very specific geographic region of the world, for a very specific company size, and for very specific industries and job functions within those specific companies. It's way, way, way more challenging to declare global topical expertise, thought leadership on AI and high performance computing. There are companies that are doing it for sure. There's subject matter experts at companies like NVIDIA who no problem being able to clear topical expertise on AI and high performance computing, depending on what they do within that company. Within OpenAI, yeah, for sure. However, once you get outside of companies that size, then it's a lot more of, are you trying to boil the ocean, or are you getting a lot more specific in your targeting and your focus? And for a small to mid-sized company that wants to be seen as the go-to expert on infrastructure consulting for AI and high performance computing applications, I'd be thinking about how tight that ideal client profile is, having that really tightly defined target account list and a really strong grasp on the most important core buyer personas in those accounts, what they're focused on achieving in the next 6, 12, 18 months to drive their objectives and key results to drive their core priorities forward for individually as a team and as a company, and what's driving them nuts, what they're struggling with the most, what's really stressing them out when it comes to how they navigate their career challenges that are directly and indirectly related to AI and high performance computing. And again, the goal is to get in early and often, as early as possible in the journey, so you stay with them side by side as they continue to refine and define their criteria and spread this adoption throughout other key stakeholders on the decision committee in these companies. And often recognizing that this is not one and done. Companies that tend to overinvest in huge splashes at national and global conferences really set themselves up for a lot of visibility challenges down the road. A key stakeholder on this kind of initiative will go through like 25 to 30 touch points. So if your budget is going on some huge bets and there's very little left for those other 24, 27, 28 touch points throughout the journey, you're really leaving yourself highly vulnerable to other alternatives for how these core personas are learning about and shaping the criteria that they use to navigate your category of infrastructure, building and making the right infrastructure decisions for scaling up AI and high performance computing over time. So that's what I'd be focusing on for a data center infrastructure consulting firm that's specializing in AI and high performance computing, is getting really dialed into who your ideal clients are. What are the primary goals and challenges that the most important segments in these companies are focused on right now? And even just getting a lot of clarity on who the 2 or 3 most important stakeholders are that you engage with, both pre-engagement and during the engagement and post-engagement, and truly understanding what's going on in their world and how you can add value to their biggest professional goals that are in their job description, that are front and center of how they get evaluated, how they potentially get promoted, how if they screw up would be the opposite of promotion, and how you can rescue them, how you can save them from the things, the challenges, the struggles that are absolutely driving them nuts when it comes to anything related to data center infrastructure that supports their AI and HPC initiative. So that's how a data center infrastructure consulting firm can focus on AI and HPC. We have 3 more questions to tackle in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. But before we do that, we're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, our weekly live show where we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges throughout the data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you like to watch on. Okay, what is our next question up for this week? How does a data center services company niche down? How does a data center services company niche down? That is a fantastic question. And I think it's a very timely one. The reason being is we see 2 primary go-to-market levers that companies throughout the data center ecosystem are investing in right now, given the hyper growth that's going on throughout the ecosystem, given the amount of capital that's flowing into the ecosystem. So we see two primary paths. One is the bigger getting bigger, and the smaller are getting more highly focused, more tightly niched. What do I mean by all of that? Where we're largely seeing pretty much every week that there are 8, 9-figure investments, in some cases even there's massive investments in consolidating, where private equity companies are purchasing data center operators or purchasing other private equity companies, or data center infrastructure manufacturers are purchasing other data center infrastructure manufacturers. Just last week, one of the big three hyperscalers purchased a massive utility company. We're just continuing to see consolidation at unprecedented levels. And it seems every time that NVIDIA continues to grow its valuation, it's also choosing to be investors, almost like venture capital style, in companies throughout its ecosystem, where it can take a much more strategic role in guiding and funding the growth trajectory of that particular company. So that's the big getting bigger. And if you don't have designs on an exit strategy, on being acquired in the coming months or in the coming years, what we're seeing along the same lines is recognizing that trying to be all things to all companies and all people within those companies is very, very, very difficult to do as a smaller company. So we see smaller companies getting increasingly specialized. So those are the two primary drivers, growth drivers, that we see right now. And what do we mean by, what are some of the ways that you can specialize? Well, if we think about your business model and we think about your ideal client profile, you could specialize in a particular geographic region where having geographic presence there gives you a significant competitive advantage relative to other options that are in that particular region. You could specialize in a certain size company that's currently being neglected and overlooked. Like maybe, for example, in your segment within the data center industry, the big guys are all focusing on mid-market and enterprise and have completely ignored even larger small businesses. So you think of something in your roadmap, you think of something in your service delivery, you think of something in your positioning that's an especially good fit for a very neglected segment of the market that has, for example, 50 to 200 employees. Not much different than another version of what I did earlier on in my career. A lot of the work that I did with Microsoft small business server team and channel partner team was figuring out at the time how you take world-class technology and figure out how to do that internally for a small company that doesn't have an internal IT function and that doesn't have the budget of a Fortune 1000 company. So if you can figure out, based on a high demand, overlooked area in your part of the data center ecosystem, where the big guys have gotten too expensive, too complicated, too many moving parts, and are completely neglecting a segment that definitely has some budget, but just has a smaller budget. If you can figure out a way to standardize that and productize that, yes, that's could be a significant niche, a significant area of specialization. You may also choose, in terms of niching down, to go all in on one or two types of business models or industries or segments. Let's say, for example, in your particular sector, the 800-pound gorilla, the giants in this space, tend to focus on data center operators like co-location or hyperscale providers, but for the most part, they've neglected what kind of product roadmap, what kind of feature set and support would be necessary for companies with their own data centers, with enterprise data centers. So that business model focus could also give you a unique niche that's highly overlooked. Or you could, for example, even within companies that have their own data centers, recognize that there's a lot of untapped needs with the incumbents when it comes to financial services companies and healthcare companies that have their own data centers. So a niche within a niche. A lot of this is figuring out how you're getting to and sustaining product market fit and go-to-market fit. Typically for a smaller company, you will likely spend a lot of cycles both initially getting to and maintaining and potentially pivoting into other ways of achieving product market fit. Product market fit was something that started in the late 1990s, early 2000s, coming out of Silicon Valley with the SaaS and original Web 1.0 ecosystem, with guys like Mark Andreessen and Steve Blank and Eric Ries of Lean Startup fame talking about understanding, having a lot of clarity on who your ideal clients are, the exact products and services that they purchase from your company, the frequency by which they purchase, or if it's recurring, the price points, basically all the unit economics that give you clarity that you know what you're doing and you have something that's repeatable that you can bring more investors in on, bring more debt on, and you have a high degree of confidence that the wheels aren't going to fall off. Usually at that size, at achieving that initial product market fit, it's usually still founders that are doing most of the company and product evangelizing and heavily involved in sales. As you start to hire non-founder salespeople and start building out your first sales team or teams or sales organizations, Once you really have figured out how to make that happen, where you can invest millions or your local currency equivalent in scaling those job functions, and the wheels won't fall off in terms of conversion rates, retention rates, and core unit economics, you will have achieved what's known as go-to-market fits. And go-to-market fit usually, if product market fit usually happens at companies in the anywhere up to 50 employees, a couple handfuls of employees, go-to-market fit usually happens somewhere between like 10 and 100 employees or 10 and 50 employees, where as you start adding more and more sales folks and marketers and account managers, client success, you have a high degree of confidence that they're going to achieve and exceed their quotas, that they're going to be able to stay with your company for the duration, and there's not going to be a revolving door of talent coming in and out of your company. You're not going to constantly be onboarding and ramping new people just to tread water without having significant growth in your company. And then if you have a channel partnership type of model, meaning that you've already achieved product market fit, you've already achieved go-to-market fit, and you decide maybe that you want to work with integrators or resellers or distributors or managed service providers or agents or something like that, you may decide to have a channel partner. And when you have your first cohort, your first group of 10, 20, 30 channel partners that have been with you for at least a year and have collected some commissions and been happy with the arrangement that they've had with marketing and selling and servicing as an extension of your company, you will have achieved not just product market fit and go-to-market fit, you'll have achieved channel partner market fit. So all of these are key considerations for figuring out how you can best niche down. But a lot of it's just really looking at patterns, looking at where you've been most successful, looking at which kinds of clients are most profitable, which clients get the most value, what gets you the most predictable hiring result, what process, what playbook. And it's a moving target. So in terms of, I often talk about the go-to-market teams that are balanced include marketers and sales and post-sales and product managers, innovators, as well as executive sponsors. And this is one particular case where the product manager's input is incredibly important because they're the ones that are closest to understanding what's being built, what's going to be built next, and are in a great position to identify untapped niches. And a smaller company as well, when you tend to hire people with a lot of startup experience, you also can benefit from your marketers and your sales professionals potentially being in positions to be occasionally wearing the hat of being part of the product function, part of the product evangelist, because when they start to see patterns of like, you know what, this is the third or fourth prospect that would have signed up if we just had this feature. We're consistently seeing leads that are being rejected by the sales team because we don't have this feature. So this is where having a strong working relationship built on trust with core internal stakeholders and getting rid of internal friction can be really, really helpful to identifying these untapped opportunities with both your current clients and future clients as you continue to niche down. And in a world where so much of the buyer's journey is now self-service for so many sectors within the global data center ecosystem, meaning that by the time you meet a prospect or client, they're almost ready to buy. A lot of creating and promoting and publishing content and hosting amazingly helpful educational events experiences is very, very conducive to companies that are niching down, because you can't adjust on the fly quite as much as you used to be able to. It used to be that you could count on, if you did most things right, that your sales team would spend about half of the sales cycle with your prospects and clients. In a self-driven world where people are just plain addicted to the instant gratification that they get from ChatGPT and similar tools, that journey means that by the time you get to meet a new prospect or client, they're almost ready to buy. So the only way to typically earn your way in early and often is by educating and building trust, publishing, promoting, creating fantastically helpful learning and development, professional development content, and events experiences. So that also is part and parcel, a huge, huge part of niching down and prioritizing the right buyer personas and segmenting and customizing for their particular goals, their particular challenges. And again, like at a high level, what's going on in the global industry, we see a tremendous amount of consolidation where mid-sized companies are being acquired by huge companies, and huge companies are acquiring other huge companies. In general, just the bigger are getting bigger. And the companies that are staying smaller by very definition, are usually flourishing because they're very open to continually reevaluating the best use of their talents, the best use of their capital, and finding the segments that most highly value their unique advantages in the marketplace. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how data center services companies can niche down. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to help spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform you're watching. And if you're listening on a platform where you can review and rate us, especially if you love the show, be sure to take a moment and review and rate us as well. We'd love to get your input and support. So next up, how do we get to the right data center buyers at the right time? How do we get to the right data center buyers at the right time? So I think a lot of how to address this depends on the nature of your business model and how well you understand their journey. Whether you're selling something that is highly commoditized, where there's relatively little sales involvement, relatively little differentiation, and you're either an order taker or they're buying kind of like in an e-commerce fashion, or whether it's a long considered buyer's journey, long considered sales process where there's a lot of education and trust building that needs to happen along the way. I see a lot of polarization of those two extremes happening within the data center industry, where companies are either understanding that in a self-driven world where typically 83% of a journey is happening within you in the room, without you being in the room, especially with highly technical, highly educated, highly cynical sales allergic buyers, there's a lot of companies that are conceding that their commoditized entry-level price points are best served by self-serve, are best served by listing in marketplaces, are best served by leaning more heavily on channel partners, or all of the above. At the other extreme, where we're talking about very high average client value, considered purchase decisions, 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure kind of purchase decisions, then yeah, there's a lot of traditional marketing and sales and nurturing and education and trust building and diagnosing and prescribing and exploring that goes on throughout complex journeys. And especially in that second scenario, I think it's super important not only to understand the typical journey, but it's also really important to recognize that a core part of thriving in this kind of environment is early and often. Early, we need to understand what's the leading indicator that they're going to be in market for your product or service in the coming weeks or the coming months, because we've spent a lot of time with empathy, walking a mile, walking a kilometer in their shoes, and really understanding those big goals and challenges that each of our segments are dealing with right now, and figuring out how we can add value and immerse ourselves in their world in a professional development, learning development kind of capacity, so that they see your client-facing team members more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders. And so it's not just early, it's often. It's recognizing that a typical buyer in a considered purchase decision may go through 25 to 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. The companies that are crushing it have massive surface area in most or all of those 25 to 30 touch points. The companies that are struggling with survival and differentiation and feel like they're treading water all the time and sacrificing a lot of margins to be able to get money losing deals over the finish lines, those are the ones that are pinky toeing it in this, that are barely showing up, that have very, very little presence in those 25 to 30 touch points. Those are the typical companies that are overinvest in a really expensive event sponsorship or something like that, where they're really not even educating and building trust. They're just creating awareness and having some fun and socializing, but not really educating and building trust. So if you really, really want to be a huge part of getting to the right data center buyers at the right time, it's understand how sales allergic your ideal prospects and clients are compared to how they were as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. And the way to get past that sales allergy is to not show up like a salesperson anymore, to show up a lot more like a teacher and a consultant and a trusted advisor, as opposed to a traditional quota hungry, commission breath kind of salesperson. That's why we see so many companies in the data center ecosystem now hiring career IT professionals and career engineers into sales related roles, because they know that this gives that individual superpowers to have a great conversations and told about what's really going on. If you've ever gotten the feeling when you talk with people on your sales and marketing team and account management teams that they're either being left in the dark or being lied to or not being given the whole truth about what's really going on because there's just not trust, it's largely because they don't perceive that your team members are capable of understanding what's really going on in their world. Education and trust is so incredibly important, and it starts with understanding their context really well. So this changes the nature of who you hire. It changes the urgency of upskilling and reskilling and cross-training. This changes the urgency of people on your commercial team investing in entry-level and intermediate-level training and certification credentials that put them on equal footing more as a peer with the prospects and clients that they work with. It changes the nature of the kinds of interactions that you architect around getting to the right buyers at the right time. So getting to the right buyers at the right time is very much a function of your business model, your products and services, and your target clients. So this is by very definition a product market fit exercise, a go-to-market fit exercise, maybe even a channel partner market fit exercise of getting extreme clarity on who they are, the products and services they purchase from your company, what they pay for those, how often they buy, all the basic unit economics, and then recognizing that this isn't one and done. We need to be in there all the time, 7 by 24 by 365, because the moment we are not, and they're going to look for answers, we don't know that they're going to go look for answers during traditional business hours when someone from your team is available. There's a really good chance that if they work in IT, when they have time or urgency to research this and get back into their journey, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, their local time, or 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon on a holiday weekend when no one from your team is available. So we need to make sure that we're not only in there early and often, but we provide all of these amazingly helpful educational resources that continually, always on, educate and build trust. It's incredibly, incredibly important to get us out of the vendor box and keep us out of the vendor box. That always on from a tactical perspective looks a lot like strong social media coverage, strong email marketing coverage, strong events coverage, all of the above, and getting hyper specific about who they are, what's going on in their world, and being able to surface and point them in the right direction of something that you know that's incredibly valuable for that person at that particular time. It may seem like, when I bring this up, it may seem like rocket science to you, but basic marketing technology software that's been around since the early 2010s and just continues to get better and more mature has been very, very capable of recognizing that, oh, there's a known contact that subscribes to our email newsletter, or they came to one of our webinars and they're on our pricing page right now. I bet they're interested in learning more about our product or service, or they're on our contact us page right now. I bet they're potentially interested in contacting us, or they're on our case studies page. I bet they're trying to learn about how others use our product or services. A tremendous amount of inferential by having your CRM and your marketing technology hooked up to that and proactively feeding back an automated resource that suggests the next logical step in a journey when someone has exhibited that sign. And of course, you can potentially send Slack messages and email messages and SMS messages to other core team members that should put some human interaction in that as well. But yeah, these are all ways of getting the timing right. Is don't presume that what's convenient for you is convenient for them. In a self-driven buyer's journey, they're in the driver's seat. If you want to get into the passenger seat along with them, you got to play ball with them in the way that they want you to play ball. If you're still forcing them into your 2010s, what's now considered selfish prospecting and qualification playbook, because it makes you feel like you're in control, you're not in control. If there was ever any controversy about whether you're still in control, ChatGPT has ripped that away for good, and Copilot and Perplexity and Gemini and Copilot. And they just, the immediate gratification that they're getting and the instant answers that they're getting is a tremendous challenge for traditional sales and marketing folks that are living in the past. And the way to be living in the present is to recognize that the way to get recommended by these answer engines, if you've ever heard of answer engine optimization, AEO, kind of the more modern version of search engine optimization, the way to earn your way in is still fantastic, highly valuable content and educational events and fantastic trust signals. Trust signals can't be purchased. I know there's a lot of big conference companies and big associations in this industry that want to think that they can sell you trust. You can't buy trust. No more than you can sell and buy love. And yes, I do recognize that there's some regions in the world that do have some data centers where you literally can buy trust and love by the hour. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, and we're not going to get into the moral and ethical parts of that. We're talking about earning your way in authentically with highly educated, highly technical, highly skeptical sales, allergic IT professionals and engineers and developers and other key ecosystem folks. And if they sense that you're faking it by buying a who's who list or buying a contributor network faux editorial advertorial in some kind of publication or something like that, they figure that out pretty quickly. A lot of the reason why this industry is in a trust academic right now and a trust epidemic right now with external stakeholders, community stakeholders, is because they've punted their communication and their content and their events one too many times over to gatekeepers and have completely lost the ability to control their own voice. And it's crazy because the cost of you controlling your own voice and having great educational content and educational events is a tiny, tiny fraction of these ego-driven, massive expenditures. I don't know why people have gotten so brainwashed, cultified, whatever you want to call it, to completely ignore the reality of what's better being in a room where 10% of 3,000 are your ICP, but only 5% of them are paying attention to you at any given time. And you're lucky if you can get a minute or two with them or 15 minutes with them without literally bribing them. Or having 20 of the perfect people coming to your classroom or conference room to spend 90 minutes with you every month for the next 12 months. And loving that experience so much that they bring their coworkers and their boss and the rest of the decision committee along with them. One is a bribe, one is earned attention. Do you want to be in the bribing business? Do you want to earn attention? Which do you think is going to be more effective when it comes to selling to highly technical, highly educated, sales allergic, cynical stakeholders, decision committee members? It's so obvious. I don't know why people think that what they have is so special that everyone's going to overlook common sense. I don't know why they think that their prospects lack the street smarts to understand when they're being bamboozled and when they're being manipulated as opposed to actually earning and spending time with a teacher and a consultant and a subject matter expert. But when it comes to getting to the right data center buyers at the right time, I would encourage you to invest in world-class educational events that you host yourself, that are designed to be exactly 100% remarkably relevant to the goals and challenges for your 2 or 3 most important segments. And the amazing part with that is you can do it for a tiny fraction of what you're currently investing in national and global conferences, and it will have amazingly higher levels of impact as you get the face time that you're craving so badly with the perfect people in the perfect accounts in the right context, so that they see your client-facing team members as the go-to teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even a thought leader in anything and everything having to do with your segment within the data center industry. Extreme focus, extreme precision, game-changing results. Think about it. That's how I would approach how to get the right data center buyers at the right time. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to hit the like button. Fun fact when hosting the show, 90 minutes, sometimes as much as 2 hours, solo host without a moderator. How much water do I drink in the course of that? Let's see if someone can, I'll cover up the top here so you can't look, but I'm super curious if someone can guess how much water actually I end up drinking in a 90-minute talk. And I guess it varies a little bit depending on the week. Some weeks, if I have a little bit of a cold and a scratchy throat, yeah, I'm drinking a little bit more. Sometimes during the time of the year where it's more humid or more dry, then yeah, that can certainly impact it. But yeah, interesting fun facts on ounces or liters of water. So anyway, the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is, how do we market and sell data center IT solutions? How do we market and sell data center IT solutions? That is a terrific question. And I think a lot of it has to do with the category within the data center ecosystem that you exist within, and even the subcategory. What do I mean by category and subcategory? So the data center ecosystem is organized into data center operators, or at least this is how we organize it at DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. There's data center operators, there's data center technology companies, there's data center facilities related companies, there's data center construction, real estate, and investment companies. We put construction, real estate, and investment companies together. They're really like first cousins, joined at the hip, like siblings. And then there's outsourced sales and marketing companies. So there's 5 different sectors: the operators, tech, facilities, construction, real estate, investment, and outsourced sales and marketing. So when it comes to figuring out what the right way is to market and sell data center IT solutions, a lot of it has to do with not only which of those 5 sectors you're located in, but what your business model is within those sectors and what that means for your average client value, average lifetime value, average order value, whatever you want to call it, and the size of client that you're selling into. So I'll give you a couple of examples with this. So for example, within data center operators, like retail co-location compared to like wholesale or hyperscale is like typically night and day between the size of company that you're selling to and, most importantly, the financial value of that agreement. For example, the entry level part of co-location is often at a low enough price point that goes up against the extreme upper level of like website hosting. So in many regions of the world, it's not uncommon to find co-location operators who have an entry level co-location offering that's priced at a small business price point starting at a few $100s a month or your local currency equivalent. So even on a 36-month agreement, which for the most part is the standard agreement, it could be 24 months, it could be longer, but let's say for argument's sake, it's 36 months. 36 months at $299 a month, $300 a month for even math, works out to, what is that, $10,800 as the contract value. So $10,800 on a 3-year contract is not much different than SaaS, software as a service, that someone might be buying in a small to mid-sized company. You don't have to look far to find whether it's ERP, whether it's marketing technology, whether it's CRM software, customer relationship management software, to find people that have a software as a services bill with a SaaS company that's a few $100s. And maybe it's month to month, maybe it's with a 1-year minimum commitment. But in that context, it's very, very unlikely that SaaS company has field sales. That's a battle. That's something that was rehashed over the last 10 or 20 years, where venture capitalist firms that fund early stage SaaS companies have said, no. Below $10,000 average recurring revenue or lifetime value, there is no way that you can afford outside sales. In a lot of contexts, we don't even think you can afford inside sales at that price point. It really needs to mostly be a self-service sign up. Now, I've known some SaaS companies in the marketing tech space that at $10,000 a year with a $30,000, where it's like triple that, they'll start to have significant amount of inside sales involvement, but it's definitely no field sales, and it's definitely a more junior level salesperson as opposed to someone that's a more expensive sales resource, someone that's typically doing their own prospecting, running the whole deal management kind of process. And it's a much quicker sales cycle, at least when you have the targeting and the qualification right, and really dialed into product market fit and go-to-market fit. So that's like retail co-location. Obviously, there's plenty of co-location salespeople that are selling heavy 5-figure and 6-figure deals all the time, because instead of people taking small amounts of it, they take several racks, they take several cabinets, they take private suites, a whole host of things where the upper end of the range of co-location can start to approach really tiny, like hyperscale, wholesale kind of. But just other things being equal, co-location tends to be a much more commoditized kind of sale, a much quicker sales cycle, when you understand whether they're in market or not in market. Obviously, if they're in a long-term contract and they're happy, they're definitely not in market. And wholesale hyperscale tend to be much, much larger deals. They're usually at least 6-figure, usually 7-figure deals. And because of that, it requires a lot more resource investment, a lot more brand building, a much more mature kind of sales approach, a lot deeper levels of expertise, because you're selling to a much more sophisticated buyer. There's a lot more stakeholders involved, a lot more complex political maneuvering and ROI justifications and case positioning and everything that needs to be navigated on these huge sales. So that's just a quick example of some of the big differences in marketing and selling, even with just 2 different kinds of subsectors within data center operators. Data center technology, there's certain kinds of data center technology that is typically going to be delivered digitally, like virtualization software, like just software in general. And then there's hardware where physical presence is needed, like storage, servers, cabling, connectivity, meet me rooms, cross connects, and where following installation, there's rarely a need to go on site, then that has very different implications for how you market, how you sell, how you service, and how expansive your geographic region, your addressable market can be. Very different ways of marketing and selling and servicing virtualization or cybersecurity or software for a co-location or a data center operator, enterprise data center, as opposed to where there's physical goods, physical products involved, like fiber optic cabling, patch panels, routers, switches, storage attached networks, a whole host of issues that are especially relevant in data center technology. Data center facilities tends to be a little bit more brick and mortar marketing and sales needs, meaning that it's relatively unlikely that you're making a facilities related sale without having physical presence in that market, at least at a certain economic value. And because of that, it changes the urgency of having and the importance of having physical marketing presence and physical sales presence in that particular area. And again, it varies tremendously depending on the nature of how big or small your price point is, how big or small their company is. Like, I'll give you an extreme example. Let's say you're selling commoditized battery backup units to a very small co-location data center that has 24 racks or something like that. And you're selling those battery backup units at a price point of several $100s or your local currency equivalent. It's very unlikely that a lot of field marketing, a lot of field sales are going to be involved in that, because that's a very, very commoditized piece of the data center ecosystem that's updated and adjusted over time, but it's something that's literally been around for, I used to have a fractional CTO business 25 years ago, and it's changed. That product category has changed a little bit, but for the most part, it's still a very, very mature, pretty straightforward commoditized product where it's tough to have a lot of differentiation. And because of that, companies just don't tend to invest a lot of one-off high client acquisition cost of acquisition kind of investments in that particular category. They're way more likely to go self-service, way more likely to lean on marketplaces, way more likely to lean on channel partners. At the other extreme, when we're talking about like power, energy within a data center facility sale, is when we're talking about huge generators. those for sure are going to require some on-site marketing so they can actually see the benefits and see the demonstration, on-site sales, on-site services, on-site installation. Again, we're talking about something a few $100s versus a few $1 million or your local currency equivalent. And again, will vary a lot depending on how big your company is, how big their company is, whether you have geographic presence in that area, whether you're leaning on channel partners, integrators, distributors, master agents, whatever you want to call it, that gives you leverage in that area. But just some extreme differences on how marketing and selling can be quite different, even within the same sector, the ecosystem, depending on the nature of what you're selling. Data center commissioning and decommissioning, very, very much a must be there kind of delivery mechanism. In theory, you can market and sell it digitally through webinars and Zoom calls, but because ultimately you're going on site, both pre-sales and going to be pretty much living on site post-sales for at least several days or several weeks or longer, that's a very, very physical presence kind of motion for marketing and sales. Construction and real estate and investment, I think you need to have strong digital presence because you need to cover those 25 to 30 touch points and have decent surface area. But if there was ever a sector within the data center ecosystem that's extraordinarily more conducive to in-person marketing, in-person sales, in-person account servicing, account management, as opposed to being done primarily virtually, it is for sure within construction and site selection and data center design and data center real estate and data center real estate investment trusts and just investors in general. Within outsourced sales and marketing, kind of a couple of interesting extremes as well, like professional services, like marketing agencies, PR agencies. A lot of that can be done digitally in terms of marketing, selling, and servicing. But if you're in the conference business, sure, there's virtual summits, there's digital summits, there's online conferences. But if you are renting out hotel facilities, exhibit halls, expo halls, like, yeah, it's very, very much a process where ahead of time leading up to it may be done by Zoom calls, phone calls, and emails. But yeah, for sure, there's massive presence that you need in the, certainly in the days leading up to and during the actual event itself. So yeah, among the 57 different business models that we track at DCSMI, there's definitely some business models that are force some decision points around how to staff up marketing and selling for your particular kind of solution within the data center ecosystem. But a lot of times they're just very practical considerations around unit economics, like what you can invest in client acquisition costs, what does monthly recurring, annual recurring, lifetime value look like? What's the ratio of lifetime value to client acquisition costs, all the basic unit economics. And as parts of the data center ecosystem continue to be commoditized, as companies struggle with differentiation, as companies concede certain parts of their business to go self-service, self-purchase, self-onboarding, to go through marketplaces, to go through channel partnerships, it changes the nature of how you hire internally versus what you decide to outsource, what you determine to be core, and what you determine to concede that there's much better options that make sense financially for your company and that lean into strong buyer preferences for self-service. So at the end of the day, I think it really is one big depends on how to market and sell data center IT solutions. A lot of it depends on your business model, your company size, their company size, and how big or small the average sale is that you're selling into, where you can add value versus where the value as a human and where the value needs to be a lot more productized and made a lot more self-service. But even in very high touch, very high value, very high ticket, highly considered purchase decisions, because there's such a strong emphasis now on so much of the research and decision making happening before these initial conversations, it's still incredibly important to have a lot of air cover around your marketing and sales organization on being able to deliver self-service and being able to deliver virtually as a complement to more traditional marketing and sales playbooks that are still a lot more human-centric and in many cases in-person-centric. So again, know your business model, know your go-to-market playbook, understand those buyer personas, understand the ideal client profile, and understand how your marketing and sales team can add value so that they're seen a lot more like teachers and consultants and educators, subject matter experts, maybe even thought leaders to get out of that vendor box and stay out of the vendor box so that they can help your company achieve its most ambitious growth goals in the coming months and years and overcome some of its biggest growth challenges and bottlenecks that often get in the way without giving a lot of thought to buyer preferences and sustaining product market fit. I think another big area too that people overlook is that you can have product market fit for a while and you can lose product market fit. It's very much a moment in time. What causes your company potentially to lose product market fit? The marketplace changes. New competitors come and go. New buyer segments come and go. Some of your biggest clients, they may be going through consolidation and facing pressure to do business differently than they did. For sure, what we're going through now with the ramp up of AI infrastructure across a huge part of all industries is definitely forcing a lot of these conversations as well. So those are all the different considerations that I'd be thinking about for how to market and how to sell data center IT solutions across the data center ecosystem. If you have an idea for a topic or a challenge or a question that you're grappling with, that your team is struggling with, that your company is struggling with, that you think would be a great fit for addressing on an upcoming episode of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we will add that to the consideration queue of topics for upcoming episodes. If you want to make sure that you get invited to upcoming educational events like this and get alerted about new similar kinds of educational resources, make sure that you're subscribed to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free by visiting the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. And I also host the interview-centric Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And speaking of interviews, if you know a subject matter expert within the data center ecosystem that you think would be a fantastic fit to interview on an upcoming episode of Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and you and I are connected on LinkedIn, feel free to message me on LinkedIn and nominate that expert. Always looking for new, interesting voices to highlight within the global data center ecosystem. And speaking of LinkedIn, if you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be, make sure to mention in the connect invitation that you've watched and that you're a fan of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. And I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. So we're so glad that you were able to join us for this week's show, where we address some of the biggest sales and marketing challenges throughout data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And we look forward to seeing you back again next week for another installment where we'll help you level up on marketing, sales, and go-to-market strategy that are essential to take your career, take your team, and take your company to new levels of success throughout the data center industry. Be well, take care, and we'll see you again soon. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.